Chapter 4. A chord of 3 is not easily broken. The Wilson living room, with its 2 large sofas, a love seat, and 3 recliners often were not unoccupied, as one of Grant's favorite pastimes was to welcome guests and new friends. The cozy bright living room, to the right of the center staircase, lent half the depth of the century-old English colonial, which sat on 500 of some of Franklin, Tennessee's finest acreage. It had a formal dining room to the left, connected to the rear large kitchen. That dining room welcomed hundreds of guests and entertained and fed loved ones thousands of times. The addition of a 3-season porch off the east end of the length-wide kitchen saw many church ladies' teas over the years. The warm earth tones on the walls in the living room and kitchen reflected the southern exposure, which was a welcomed heating element in the drafty home on many a cold winter's day. The bold deep red walls of the formal dining room contributed to every exquisite cuisine that graced the large mahogany table, which fed many new church visitors in the home Emma Grace had inherited from her father, Pastor Tim. Nick arrived back at Grand's early the next morning, bouncing through the front double doors with a renewed and happy spirit. He had his teach right there in his own state, in his own grandparents' home, and soon she would be in his own neighborhood. He recalled, back in the day, when he bought his house on that secluded dirt road, across from the railroad tracks, how much he thought his teacher in the pink hat would have loved that home, and many days since then, he had wished he bought it, especially after hearing that a corporation had bought up all the land around both houses. At that time, he feared a new subdivision development coming in, thus crowding him out of his private world. Now, knowing his teach bought the old Victorian, he surmised that they would be surrounded by new houses packed in their little paradise out in the boonies, and their private world would no longer be that way. When he entered his Grand's foyer, he was singing a high tune. He bent down the over 1 foot difference between him and his favorite relative and kissed her on the cheek. "Hi, beautiful Gran. Isn't it a grand day out there? The sun is shining, the birds are singing, and spring has sprung. It's about time, huh? It feels like it's been winter forever." He was greeted by his Gran, shhhing him, as Katie was still asleep. 2 years, I'll bet, for you Nicky, huh? Gran asked. "Now, be quiet, your darling teacher is still asleep. She was very tired last night. We talked for several hours, and she went to bed late." They both walked toward the kitchen through the dining room. "Oh, what did you talk about?" Gran turned and looked back. "Nicky, women do not share secrets. How else do you think we can keep our men hopping?" "Gran, I'm not her man." "I know that, and she told me about your renewed friendship. That is the best way to go. Gramps and I went that way, you know. It makes for a better marriage. I heard that her trooper has taken a shine to you, as of late. I think that is great." Nick left the kitchen and looked up the stairs, listening for any sounds up on the second floor, making sure Katie was not awake or ready to descend the stairs. He did not want her to hear what he was about to reveal to his Gran. When he returned to the kitchen, his Gran looked puzzled. They sat at the 6-seated kitchen table in the spacious country kitchen, and Nick leaned in toward her as if to whisper. "Gran, what did you hear?" "I heard that he's been very nice to you." Katie is confused as to why, but I think that is wonderful. "Gran, brace yourself. You must not tell Katie this," but he hesitated, rose, and peeked out the swinging door to look and see if Katie was anywhere near them. He came back, leaned into Gran again, and started to whisper. "He's got pancreatic cancer. He's not expected to live long, maybe 6 months or more, but that's all." Gran immediately drew her hand to her mouth and began to cry. "Oh, that poor dear. I'm assuming she does not know," she said with her tremoring voice. Nick shook his head. "Scotty says her recovery is going too well to tell her now." "I agree. I think that his plan is to allow us to establish a relationship so that I can carry her when he does tell her, and when he leaves this world." Nick's eyes began to water. He rose again and went toward the door. He left the kitchen and came back with a box of tissues. Get it out now, Gran. We cannot let her see us crying. They both blew their noses and wiped away their tears. You're hurting for her, aren't you? Yes, Gran, but not just her. I have really grown to like that guy. He is a great and noble man. He's a hero in every sense of the word. We've talked a few times. I really like him. It figures, huh? The man who is the rival for my dream woman's heart has now become near and dear to my own heart. Nick dropped his head and cried. Matthew and Becca are all torn up. The girls don't know yet, either. I pity Matthew when he has to tell them. Nick held his head in his hands. Gran, they welcomed me into their family, just like that. Even Scotty. I think it's my role to be a leaning post for them. I'm not up for that. I don't know that I can be that strong for all of them. He dropped his head from the burden. Gran got up from her seat and stood behind Nick and wrapped her arms around him and started to pray. Oh Lord, we don't understand these things. It seems so cruel. Why there has to be so much more suffering for that dear child. Thank you for putting a tender place in my Nicky's heart for that man. Thank you for endearing that man to my Nicky. Please give them, the entire family, strength to endure this and prepare our Katie's heart. Lord, build a love inside her heart for my Nicky, so that love will carry her through another trial. My heart is torn for these people. Please be with them. Nick sniffled as he agreed with his grandmother in prayer. In Jesus' name, Nick said. He raised his head and turned to hug his grandmother. Honestly, Gran, you are the most wonderful woman I know. My teach is going to learn so much from you. Darling, she's already taught me much. She's a wise woman for her young age, with a huge heart, and she loves you so. She returned to her seat at the end of the table, with Nick at the corner. Did she say that? He leaned over with his hands clasped resting on the table. Not in so many words, but the way she spoke about you and your pact to be friends. Gran put her hand on Nick's arm. She was so remorseful over the angry words you two had, or rather she had for you, she said. She feels really bad. I sensed a guilt on her heart, a burden that she could not share. Gran, I think I know what that is. I'm sorry to say that I did not fight the urge very hard, nor practice any form of self-control, in terms of being a godly man, a few weeks ago when we were reunited in her cottage. She is carrying that burden as well, when it was all my fault. I seduced her. I just couldn't resist her and my love for her. Nicky, you should not have done that. You know better. What did my grandson do now? Gramps asked as he entered into the kitchen from the back door, from doing his early morning chores, tending to the horses. Nick rose to extend his hand, and Gramps wiped his hands on his worn jeans to clean off any residual hay and dirt. He then pulled his grandson in for a hearty hug, and then Nick returned to his chair at the table next to his gran. He looked over at her wondering if he should confess. Let's just say, he's human as you are, Jacob, my wonderful lover. I know that. I remember how he has lived. We've discussed all that. Nick raised his eyes in shame. Gramps walked over to Nick, he put his hand on his shoulder. Please tell me you still aren't living that way after we had settled it all. Son, honestly, how could you do that? Back up, Jacob, it was with his teach. Gramps took in a deep breath. He walked over to the other side of the table and pulled out a chair to sit opposite his grandson. Now, when would you have had that opportunity to do that? It was when I was at the moors a couple of weeks back. We were in her cottage alone, and well, I gave in pretty easy to the jolt, Gramps. Jacob Wilson shook his head but understood love's pull on a man. Now, Jacob, don't you go acting all righteous and all, you know we were guilty of the same thing. Nick's body jerked him back in his seat, and his head protruded, jutting out his chin. His eyes flew wide open and he laid his palms flat on the table while looking back and forth at his Gramps and Gran, trying to read their facial expressions. Yes, son, his grandfather said, we are human, we are not without sin. We were engaged the second time and well, we got carried away. We both felt terrible, and we confessed to Pastor Tim. He had the same look on his face as you did just now. He never expected that of his Emma Grace. I justified it with the fact that we were already married, in God's eyes, even though the marriage was annulled by a judge. I was just so desperate after 3 years to get tanked in my Emma's love cocktail again. Gran kept her head down. Gramps spoke and put his hand on his wife's arm. Hey, at least you had that. My Teach and I aren't even close to have gotten married, or even engaged, but thank you for confessing that to me. I'll bet that is what my Teach is feeling, also. Gran nodded her head. Please don't tell her that you know. She'll be devastated, and don't look at her funny. She can read people really well. Honey, we talked a lot about God's grace and how big and wide and vast it is. God understands our humanity, and yet He loves us no less when we do wrong. It's hard to comprehend, but as a parent, I have a better understanding of it than maybe you do. It's an amazing love. All three nodded their heads. I need to get my life right with God, for my girl. She's going to need me. Now, what on earth would I need you for? Katie asked as she came through the kitchen swinging door wrapped in her blanket. Except to fetch my bags and vehicle. Your rented vehicle, you little brat? Nick said, rising. Jacob walked over and gave her a good morning hug and led her to the table. How about some coffee, beautiful lady, Jacob said as he moved toward the Keurig coffee maker. Nick held out his chair for her, as he moved toward the chair to his left. He held the chair as she sat keeping herself wrapped in the blanket that he scooped her up into the previous night. I don't think so, about the beautiful part, with no makeup or clean clothes. I'm sure I'm a mess, having camped out on my new porch swing, well almost mine. Nope, you are as beautiful as ever to me, Nick said as he pushed in her chair, then turned the chair around next to her, straddling it with his arms resting on the back. Yeah, well, we've already covered those sunspots in your eyes from all the spotlights on you when you are on stage, affecting your vision, oh, and you being off your meds, too, she said, giving him a look and a quick grin. Excuse me, but I don't need any meds, and I have perfect vision. Well, then you are sucking up for something. She looked up at Nick and snickered. Nope, I don't need to suck up to my friends, only scary troopers who can crush my vocal cords or break my hands. They all laughed. I have brought you your luggage, it is in the back of my vehicle. I ran over there after Gran called, and I got them. You went all the way out to Christiana again last night? You didn't have to do that, we could have gotten it when we went for my car there, today. Nick cleared his throat, needing to direct her a different way. Oh, it was no big deal, I was on that road, heading back to my house, and I just took a little detour. Gran chuckled and Nick looked at her funny. What's so funny? Katie asked Gran. Yeah, what's so funny? Nick asked, playing along. He suspected Gran had known because Sean had known that Katie's dream Victorian was right next to his house. I'll be right back. I'll get your things, Nick said, as he rose from the table and turned the chair back around, tucking it under the table. Jacob rose from the table and walked with Nick to his vehicle. Good, I need a shower, 2 days on a porch swing is not conducive to smelling like a fragrant flower. Gran chuckled. Do you want some breakfast, dear? No, I'm not hungry. Oh, okay, well, I'm under strict orders to make you breakfast, then sit here and watch you eat it. So, I guess I'm going to have to do it. Now, I know you don't like sausage, how about bacon, or maybe ham? Gran rose to walk toward the refrigerator. I love bacon, I love eggs. I adore omelets. Coming up, 1 bacon and egg omelet. Do you want cheese or anything else in it? Anything that you may have in your vegetable bin that would be easy, no cutting or chopping, I don't want to put you out. If you already have some stuff cut up, that's fine. Oh, and cheese if you have it. I just so happen to have sliced tomatoes and onions in there. Are they Vidalia onions? Katie asked, rising and walking toward Gran. No, white onions, but I can send Jake to the store for some Vidalia onions if you'd like. Oh, then no thanks. I don't want to put anyone out. I'm not a picky eater, anything will be fine. Oh, and no mayo, or anything like that. Gran laughed as Katie left the room to walk out in the living room to watch for Nick. Who puts mayo in an omelette? Gran asked quietly to herself and guffawed. Katie watched as Nick and his grandfather spoke outside by Nick's vehicle. Gramps had his hand on Nick's shoulder and Nick was looking down, kicking the gravel with his boot. Oh, my ears are itching, or is it my nose? She said to herself. Katie wandered back into the kitchen. Which is it, Gran? Your ears or your nose when someone is talking about you, she asked while cutting up some tomatoes. I think it's something like a ringing in your ears, but I'm not into all that superstitious stuff. Why do you ask, dear? Because Gramps looks like he's giving Nicholas Paul one of those grandfather lectures. Katie noticed that Gran had the cutting board out and was cutting into some fresh tomatoes. Hey Gran, I said I didn't want to make any trouble for you. Well, the sliced tomatoes looked kind of old, so I wanted to give you fresh ones. It's no trouble. How about you get the bacon out of the fridge and start on that? I think Nicholas Paul would probably want some breakfast, too. He doesn't cook for himself. He's clueless in the kitchen. Well, that's gonna change, Katie said under her breath, leaning back against the counter, still wrapped in her blanket. What did you say, dear? Katie chuckled and shook her head. Oh, nothing, I just said I can't wait to change out of these clothes and all. She said, not wanting to concede to a future with Nicholas Paul. Oh, okay, Gran said, having heard her first comment and grinned at Katie admitting to their future together. While Katie and Gran were preparing a breakfast fit for a royal army, Gramps was encouraging Nick out by the truck. Son, I'm proud of the way you are handling this. You and Katie pledging to forge a friendship. Every good marriage begins that way. She'll be your best friend for the rest of your life, if the Lord so wills for you and her to be together. I know about the trooper, her manager called me today to let us know and asked us not to mention it. I hadn't gotten a chance to tell your Gran, because I was in the barn tending the horses. I suppose you told your Gran? Nick nodded. It looks more and more like God's hand all over this every day, huh, Gramps? I mean, look at all the circumstances. My teach being pushed into the meet and greet line by Juliana, my road manager out that night, Sean volunteering to take pictures, then seeing her at the restaurant, and now finding out that her new house is right next to mine. Nick's voice began to crack and tears welled up in his eyes, pooling in his lower lids. But the part about Scotty's terminal illness. That's the worst part of it. Why would God choose it that way? It seems so unfair. All that he does is good and just. He doesn't cause sickness, son, the fall of man did. He allows it. This trooper, is he a believer? Yeah, and that little doll little Katie was the one who led him to it. She's amazing, just like her auntie. Well then, he's getting his eternal reward early and being spared the heartache of watching his Katie fall in love with another man. That is a far worse heartache. I had to watch it with Emma Grace. I thought that you were her jolt giver? Jacob put his hand on Nick's shoulder. Son, I am, but that doesn't mean one can't fall in love with another. Look at your mother. She loves Andy, but with a different kind of love. A jolt giver, as I call it, is a special thing from God. It's a gift, not everyone gets one. God gives certain people that jolt givers touch because the two of them can accomplish more together in the kingdom than individually, apart from each other. It's a special bond, it's a supernatural love, holding a marriage together and keeping that love alive, especially during the hard times. It's an extraordinary gift. Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. The devil overpowered you with his vices when you were alone, but she rescued you. Do you see? Nick nodded his head, lowering it and kicking the gravel. That makes perfect sense. It's true, without her, I was longing to fill that void in my life. I chose the wrong things. As soon as she was back, I felt complete. Even though she was furious with me, I had renewed hope. Let me tell you, son, when we met her, we knew she would be coming back. Remember back when you came to me, wondering if you had a jolt giver, and I told you that I saw that you had one. I saw her then, down the road for you, and I knew you did. I even saw one that looked just like your teach. Nick raised his head and his eyebrows. Seriously, just the way she looks? Gramps nodded, giving Nick a smile of assurance. Well, vaguely, but I remembered seeing a cute little firecracker who would keep you in line and on your toes. I was right. But she needs you just as much. Nick nodded. You don't know the half of it, Gramps. I haven't told you all that her husband did, and I'm sure it's worse than we can imagine. Losing the baby she and Michael were going to have, then her Michael, as awful as he was, and then her stepdaughter too. Katie will be devastated over the loss of Scotty, now. She may be crushed, but it won't be for long, nor will it be without hope. I think this trooper is trying to get you and her to bond so that you can carry her. Oh, I know that to be true. He all but admitted that to me. He's jealous, but he wants what's best for Katie. And that is true sacrificial love, putting one's best before our own wants and needs. Nick nodded. I'm learning that. He's an excellent example. He really makes me look bad. Jacob put both hands on his shoulders. Lift your head, son. God is giving you another chance to shine and shine brighter. You can do it. Make Scotty proud. Prove to him that his girl is safe and that he did the right thing. Carry on his legacy with her. Nick's shoulders dropped as he sighed over a burden he was not sure he could carry. Jacob pulled Nick in for a hug. You can do this, son. I have faith in you. Nick stood there with the door open and paused before reaching in for the bags. Gramps, I understand now why you gave up your career and wanted to settle down with Gran. I want that, but she'd think I was giving it up for her, when it would be for me. She'd never believe me, after what she went through with her Michael. Nicky, you have more talent in that little pinky finger than I had my entire musical life. God wants you to use it. She'll complement it. A good wife can inspire your craft and art. She'll be your muse. Remember love's muses. Maybe God wants to do something with your talent. Nick reached in and pulled out 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. Gramps took one of the suitcases, while Nick threw the duffel bag strap over his shoulders. They walked back to the front porch with Gramps' arm on Nick's back and Nick's head down. Do you think I should cross over to Christian music? He said, looking up at his Gramps, who had ascended up the first step on the porch. Gramps reached the door first and held it open for Nick to pass through. Can't you glorify God in regular country music? Who's going to be a witness to that industry if all the godly artists crossed over? Nick stopped short in his tracks and turned back toward his grandfather. Yeah, that's right. I can be different, just like I promised God as a boy. Nick and Gramps dropped the bags at the bottom of the steps and headed for the kitchen, enjoying the fragrance of maple-flavored bacon, breathing in deep and realizing their hunger which they hadn't noticed before. Yes, and an example of those love's muses or heart matters as your teach called them. Love's muses, it's a catchy phrase, isn't it? I need to release that title track as my last release while I'm working on my 4th album. They both paused in the living room to continue their conversation. Do you have one started? Nick stopped his grandfather by holding back his arm, as Gramps had turned toward the dining room for the kitchen. Yes, but I'm scrapping it. I've been inspired to write a tribute album to Scotty, what do you think? Love it. Great idea, divinely inspired if you ask me. You see what I mean? The two of you together with God in between will make you a power couple in the kingdom. Who cares about the rest? Chapter 5. She's not a picky eater. Both